Well, earlier I spoke to the former White House National Security Advisor to President Trump, General H R McMaster, and I started by asking him whether the recent US military aid for Ukraine passing through Congress and the Senate was going to have an impact on the war in Ukraine.
It's a game changer. It would have been a game changer if it didn't pass. I hope it's not too late. I don't think it's too late. Of course, you've seen this grinding Russian offensive, but the Russians are taking massive casualties, about 30,000 casualties a month, 1,000 a day. So the Ukrainians are fighting as best they can with what they've got. We've got to get them the ammunition now. There's a very heated battle around Chasiv Yar, which is a very strategic point, and it's important for the Ukrainians to have defend that territory. And then, of course, it's really important to stop the onslaught against the Ukrainian people and their infrastructure with the air defense weapon systems and the long vision fire. So you can, shoot down the arrows, Wilf, but you have to also be able to kill the archer.
And in terms of what's being provided, would it be very easy for America and the West to help Ukraine end this war through victory very quickly in terms of providing greater capabilities than has been done thus far without, I guess, which is the big consideration, triggering some kind of nuclear response from Russia?
I don't think it's going to be quickly, but I do believe, Wilf, the way that we've been providing assistance in this halting manner, this kind of inconsistent manner, the doubtful manner, especially with the latest bill that just passed, it denies Ukraine the ability to have a predictable inflow of weapons and to have them at the sufficient scale for them to be able to really conduct the two fundamental tasks that they have. Hey, protect the Ukrainian people and the infrastructure from this continued onslaught, and second, generate the combat power necessary to stop this Russian offensive and resume the offensive.
If we touch now on the Middle East, again, a few weekends ago, the whole discussion was about how much things would escalate between Israel and Iran, and clearly diplomacy has somewhat won the day for now there. Do you think that risk of escalation with Iran has gone for good or not?
No, it hasn't, because essentially, when we say that we don't want to escalate, that we are responding in very measured, proportionate ways to send signals. Hey, what that does to Iran is just say, hey, they can escalate on their own terms with impunity. I mean, Iran is pursuing a strategy in which they hope we continue to pretend like we don't understand what the return address is for all this violence. And in a horrible, cynical way, Iran is willing to expend every Arab life, if necessary, to accomplish its objectives of pushing the United States, the United Kingdom, and our allies out of the region as the first step in establishing hegemonic power in the region and destroying Israel. I mean, Wilf, that's really what they want to do. And I think the longer that we act as if we don't know that the return address is Tehran, the longer Iran is going to continue to escalate these horrible actions to create horrible human suffering on the part of the Israelis, but on the part of the Palestinians too.
Just staying on Iran, I mean, clearly it's further away, but military presence from the US, the UK is closer to that conflict. Is there a chance, is there a way in which the Western world gets drawn in to having to lead or be part of a hot response to Iran in the next year or so?
Absolutely, Wolf. I think it's coming. And the reason I think it's coming is because Iran seems to be emboldened, even though they have all sorts of internal dissent happening now. There's a massive crackdown now on women and others who are protesting, the horrible acts of this theocratic dictatorship. But they seem to be emboldened internationally, Wolf. And I think part of the reason is this talk of trying to manage the conflict and de-escalate or not escalate. I think we need to tell the Iranians we're going to begin to impose severe costs on you. Now, these don't have to be military right away, Wolf. I think there's tons of room to enforce the sanctions that are already on the books, the sanctions that the Biden administration chose not to enforce, resulting in the transfer of about $80 to $100 billion to Iran, a large portion of which right into the coffers of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. So I think, hey, the overall thing that we can do is portray strength, impose cost on Iran, and act like we know what the return address is.
In terms of China, do you see them as a challenger, an adversary, an enemy?
They're a rival and they're an adversary. I mean, they've said it themselves and they've demonstrated it through their actions. But China has initiated 5 programs. The Global Security Initiative, the Global Civilization Initiative, which ought to be quite scary to all of us, Belt and Road, and others, which are designed to make, in the words of Xi Jinping, the China dream the world dream. And you know what that means? That means tearing down the existing international order and rules for international discourse in the economic and the financial and the security realm, how you define human rights, and replace that with a new order that is sympathetic to China's authoritarian, mercantilist, statist model. And so, I'll tell you, if they succeed, Wilf, the world becomes less free, less prosperous, and less safe. And all you have to do is pay attention to their actions. I think what the world has to see now is that this isn't a choice between Washington and Beijing that they're facing. This is a choice between sovereignty and servitude. And
It's interesting how China might have responded to global events differently. The immediate response to the Ukraine war saw great unity amongst Western nations and immediate action, including some pretty severe sanctions like seizing Russia's US Treasury holdings, of which China has a lot. Whether we're talking about China in mind, Iran, or Russia, how do you think America's adversaries or enemies would have viewed things since the start of Ukraine war, really right up to the bill passing in Congress 10 days ago? And how critical was that bill passing?
it was absolutely critical, Wolf, because I think what we're seeing is the emergence of an axis of aggressors. We see that Iran, Russia, and China and North Korea are supporting one another. They share goals and objectives of tearing down the existing order, of advancing their own objectives, which in the case of Russia and China are revanchist objectives associated with what they see as returning, their nations to greatness and reestablishing their empires.
It brings us on, General, to the question of readiness and deterrence, and just wanted to focus in specifically, if we could, on the United Kingdom. What is the view from the US? I mean, more importantly, from you specifically, about the state of the British armed forces right now?
Well, as somebody who's had the privilege of serving alongside the incredibly professional, capable British Armed Forces, it just broke my heart to see the degree to which the UK and other countries, but the UK in particular, because of my affinity for those armed forces, have reduced the capacity of their armed forces to such a degree that I think it would be difficult for the UK to sustain operations at sufficient scale and for ample duration to fight and win. And of course, as part of the alliance, obviously. But I think we're at the time now where all of us, I think we have to realize that we have been over optimistic for too long, over optimistic about the geostrategic conditions and the need for us to demonstrate strength to prevent further conflict, but also over optimistic about our technological military prowess. Our adversaries have raced to catch up to us, and we're kind of asleep about this. They've taken down a good measure of that differential advantage, and so we have to now field the countermeasures to those countermeasures. We've seen obviously the ubiquity of unmanned aerial systems. Well, there's some pretty capable unmanned aerial system defenses out there, but we haven't procured them yet, Wilf.
I'm interested, General, that you said it breaks your heart to see the state of the British Armed Forces. And you probably saw that the UK just increased its pledge on defence spending, 2.5% of GDP by 2030. Obviously, that's ahead of a few of the NATO members and European countries, but it's not a drastic increase. And just to expand on your point about your affinity for having served alongside British Armed Forces, do you think the politicians fully understand what it takes, both in funding but also commitment and mentality, to get to a place where the UK armed forces are back to where they need to be? Is 2.5% of GDP enough?
I don't think it's enough, as an outsider. Some of your politicians really do get it, but many don't. And that's the same in the United States as well. And I'm thinking of the George Marshall quotation, the architect for victory here in the United States of World War II. And he said that when you have the time, you don't have the money. And when you have the money, you don't have the time. because you get the money when it's too late. And of course, another World War II American general, MacArthur, he said that every strategic failure can be summed up in two words: too late. And so I think we really do need to have a sense of urgency about this, Wilf. And people say, well, it's a marathon and everything, but we've been complacent for so long that we're behind. So we got to sprint for a while, before we can begin to gear it down for the marathon.